The Chemistry of Coolant, What Every Boat Owner Should Know by Frank Lanier. Thought about your boat's engine coolant lately? If not, you got plenty of company. Even the boat owners that do have such thoughts typically just open up the reservoir cap and see some kind of brightly colored fluid sloshing around in there and call it good. It's a sad approach for something so crucial to the proper operation and long life of your engine. Let's take a look at how to ensure your coolant is up to the task. First off, this isn't your great-grandpappy's radiator fluid, and for good reason. Early automobiles used plain water to cool the engine. It's not only cheap and plentiful, but to this day it remains the most efficient energy cooling medium you can use. That being the case, why are we even talking about antifreeze and coolant? The problem is that while water is the most efficient way to cool an engine, it isn't the best way to cool an engine for a number of reasons. First off, water is corrosive to internal engine components. It also freezes in cold weather and boils over in hot temperatures, turning to steam, both of which can result in engine damage. The solution was to add antifreeze to the water, which not only addresses freezing and boiling and corrosion issues, but also prevents the formation of limestone deposits and foaming. It also provides lubrication for pumps and other components of the system that require it. Antifreeze, coolant, what's the difference? Coolant is the correct term for a mixture of water and ethylene glycol, EG for short, heat transfer fluid. Ethylene glycol itself is commonly referred to as antifreeze, although this is somewhat misleading as it not only prevents freezing, but overboil as well. Adding to the confusion, the term antifreeze was coined decades ago by the plumbing industry to describe a propylene glycol or PG solution used specifically for winterizing fluids used to keep pipes from freezing. While both may be referred to as antifreeze, there are important distinctions between ethylene glycol and propylene glycol. Propylene glycol-based antifreeze has low toxicity, which means it can be used to winterize systems such as your boat's freshwater system. Think the ambiguous pink stuff used to do so. While ethylene glycol is poisonous, meaning it must be handled with caution and can only be used as engine coolant. Propylene glycol-based antifreeze solutions are not suitable for use as engine coolants. While that solution that you use for your freshwater system can be used to winterize an open or raw water cooled engine or the open side of a freshwater cooled engine, in other words, the one that has a closed system filled with coolant, it is not suitable for the closed portion of the engine cooling system. For the purpose of this article, antifreeze refers to ethylene glycol, while coolant indicates a mixture of ethylene glycol and water. Along those lines, cooling system or similar terms refer to the closed system of a freshwater cooled engine. Most boat owners realize they need a mixture of antifreeze and water in their engine's cooling system. However, things tend to get a little fuzzy on the ratio of each. Most engine manufacturers recommend a 50-50 mix of antifreeze and water for optimum year-round protection. Straight ethanol glycol freezes at around 8 degrees Fahrenheit and it boils at 330 degrees Fahrenheit and is around 15% less efficient at carrying heat away than straight water. Using straight water, as mentioned earlier, provides no freeze protection, no boil over protection above 212 degrees, and no corrosion protection. A 50-50 mix provides freezing protection down to minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit and boil over protection to 228 degrees Fahrenheit. A more concentrated glycol solution will increase freeze protection but reduces cooling ability, while a more diluted mixture reduces corrosion protection and lubrication properties. As a marine surveyor, I inspect many boats in the 10 to 15 year range that have had only one or two coolant changes, with some even circulating the same tired old original coolant since being placed into service. This coolant neglect has a number of consequences for your engine, from deteriorated hoses and eroded water pumps to chronic overheating or even blown head gaskets. Unfortunately, cooling maintenance is often deferred to until a failure occurs. Checking your coolant is just the right thing to do. Most owners start with a visual inspection of the coolant. It's an easy check, although one that can provide varying levels of success. For example, low coolant can be an indicator of possible leaks in the system, while coolant that resembles chocolate milk contains rust or sediment, an indication of an internal engine corrosion. Even if the coolant is brightly colored and appears like new, it doesn't mean all is well. In many such cases, testing will show that the corrosion-fighting additives are depleted or the 50-50 ratio is off. Just a few examples of why visual inspection alone is inadequate to determine coolant condition. Simply opening the reservoir cap and dumping in extra antifreeze in efforts to increase freeze or overboil protection will likely result in a mixture with too much antifreeze. Exceeding an 80% concentration of antifreeze can also cause silicate gelling, a condition where the silicate corrosion inhibiting additive of the antifreeze drops out of suspension, forming a greenish goo that clogs the system and reduces heat transfer. If gelling occurs, the system must not only be drained, but fully flushed before adding new, properly mixed coolant. If water needs to be added, the best choice is distilled water. Tap water contains dissolved minerals which can react with and reduce the effectiveness of the corrosion inhibitors. Softened water has fewer minerals but contains salt, which can be just as bad. Distilled water contains no acids, salts, or minerals and is pH neutral, all of which will help maximize coolant service life. Measuring the mix. The only way to verify a proper ratio of antifreeze, ethylene glycol, is to measure the coolant with a floating ball gauge, a hydrometer, a test strip, or a refractometer. Floating ball gauge is the cheapest of the testers. It resembles a miniature turkey baster with small colored balls inside of a clear tube. It has a squeeze bulb on one end and a short section of hose on the other. To use the ball gauge, you simply stick the hose in the coolant reservoir of a cold engine, press the squeeze bulb, and release, allowing it to suck coolant into the tube, filling it up. Remove the tube while quickly placing your finger over the end to prevent it from draining. Hold the tube upright, flick or tap the tube to shake off any air bubbles clinging to the balls, and observe how many of the balls are floating, the number and location of which will indicate the strength of the coolant as compared to the provided scale. Hydrometers work in the same fashion, but instead of balls, they use a pivoting arrow or float to indicate coolant strength. Coolant test strips are another option. They are disposable strips used to measure the concentration, level, and condition of your coolant. Once dipped into the coolant, they change colors to show the coolant's concentration level, as well as pH level and alkalinity. They're the only method that can also check the additives in the coolant that protects against corrosion or provide lubrication. A refractometer uses a prism to determine the strength of your coolant. To use, simply place a few drops of coolant in the unit, point the lens towards a strong light source, it doesn't require any power, and then look through the eyepiece. A scale will be visible that shows the coolant concentration of ethylene glycol. Many will also have additional scales allowing you to check the concentration of fluids such as battery electrolyte or windshield wiper fluid. Preventing corrosion. While the rate of corrosion inside your engine depends on a number of factors, such as the presence of minerals or other impurities in the coolant, a prime consideration is the pH of the coolant itself. Corrosion inhibiting additives are added to coolant to make it more alkaline, and it will continue to protect your engine from corrosion as long as it remains that way. When it gets acidic, however, corrosion can start. To keep coolant pH alkaline for a reasonable length of time, it must contain enough corrosion inhibitor to neutralize the acids formed from glycol degradation, which occurs normally during use as the coolant ages. This coolant neutralizing capability is called reserve alkalinity, and how long it lasts will vary depending on the quality and type of the additives used in the antifreeze, as well as factors such as heat, impurities, and dissolved oxygen, all of which can deplete these inhibitors over time. The goal of the boat owner is to monitor the coolant and replace it with new before all of that reserve alkalinity has been used up. A rainbow of colors. Back in the day, coolant color was simply a result of the type of chemicals added to prevent corrosion. This meant that you could actually tell a lot about coolant simply based on its color. Inorganic additive technology, or IAT coolant, which was commonly used from the 1920s through the early 1930s, was typically blue or green. Service life for IAT coolant was typically 2 years, after which it would have to be drained and replaced. Next came organic acid technology, or OAT coolants, which were chemically improved to provide better protection and extend coolant life. OAT coolants can either be straight OAT or a blend of IAT and OAT chemicals. The reason they are sometimes called hybrid coolants, also referred to as extended life coolants, ELC, OAT coolants have a typical service life of 5 years, although some straight OAT chemical coolants have an advertised service life of up to 10 years. OAT coolants are normally orange in color, although they can also be pink, red, blue, yellow, or dark green. Today, there is no reason for coolant to be any specific color, meaning it is strictly a manufacturer choice. This makes it pretty much impossible to tell anything about a chemicals used in the coolant by its color, or even worse, to choose a coolant based on color alone. Some older engines may not be able to use newer coolants, while some older type coolants are not suitable for use in new engines. The golden rule with regards to coolant selection is to go colorblind and simply use the coolant specified by your engine's manufacturer. When should you change your coolant? First of all, you should always follow the guidance provided by your engine manufacturer, which will take into consideration the type of coolant used. But in general, coolant should be changed every 5 years or every 1,000 hours of use. This can vary, as discussed, based on the type of coolant used. When changing your coolant, drain out the old coolant and flush the system thoroughly, again per the engine manufacturer's directions, before adding the new coolant. This ensures that all of the old coolant is removed, while also helping to dislodge any deposits that may have formed.